identity can be an asset. It can be a security mechanism. It can, it can be so many different things. And so when you have all this information from, backing it up and holding it, it becomes something that is pretty useful. So we're looking at ways that we can take that information and present it to our customers, their information, and present it to our customers in ways that is even more useful for them.
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jim McDonald, and we are having a special sponsor spotlight episode today. I've got Chris Steinke here on from MightyID, and he's going to tell us all about their exciting solution. But before we get into the contents of this episode, I want to let everyone know these are special sponsored episodes that are created in collaboration with our sponsor, in this case, MightyID, to dive more deeply into their viewpoints and specific solutions in the IAM marketplace. To make this crystal clear, this is a sponsored episode, which is a little bit different than our normal episodes, but they flow very much in the same way. Now, what the sponsored spotlight episodes allow us to do is provide you with, in-depth insights and expert perspectives straight from the sources, straight from the vendors themselves, and we get to hear about their solutions. A lot of our listeners have told us that they kind of treat these like first sales calls, right? They can, hear about a solution and figure out whether or not it makes sense for them to look at said solution. So, like I said, I've got Chris Steinke on from MightyID. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to coming on and chatting with you guys. Been big fans of the show for a while.
That's awesome. I've been really looking forward to it as well. Really interested in your solution. The more that we've talked in preparation for the show, the more excited I've gotten. And we're going to talk a lot about IAM resilience today. But before we kind of get into the meat of things, it would not be us if we didn't start the show by asking how you got into identity access management in the first place. So kind of tell us about your journey. How did you get into IAM? Did it pick you or did you pick it?
Probably a little bit of both. It started a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away when I was in the Marine Corps. And I started working inside the technology field and the emerging security field. Back when I started, there wasn't a specific job around information or IT security, but you had to, secure IDs and you had to have, access and security and methods like that. And then it moved into, after I got out of the military, moved into working inside companies like Lucent Technologies, moving into American Express, other brands like Zelle, and now I'm here with MightyID. And those journeys have taken me through multiple roles around security, around infrastructure, around cloud, around application development. And every one of those roles, either I had responsibility for the identity and access management environment, or I somehow touched the identity environment or had something to do with it. And like your podcast says, identity has always been at the center of what I've done. So that's really the brief story of how I've got here.
Yeah, I feel like we hit the bullseye with the name of the podcast.
And yeah, I think so too.
A one-take wonder, if you will. So, yeah. So I think if there's anything in the world that's going to teach you about being resilient, it's being a Marine. But you mentioned a kind of an interesting path, and now you're at MightyID. You're the chief operating officer there. Tell us what MightyID does. What did you guys bring to the table?
Right. So MightyID is really focused on solving the problem of resiliency for your identity platform and your identity and access management. Think of it as, not just backup and recovery, but the ability to have flexibility, the ability to have migration capabilities, the ability to have failover across your identity platform or platforms. Really today, having the ability to bounce back, you've got so many threats out there related to identity spaces. You hear it on your podcast quite often, the statistic that is quoted around like 80% or so of security attacks have a vector through identity. And so one of those attacks is your identity system and your identity is not being available. And so when you think about that, how do you make that recoverable? How do you make that be able to absorb an attack, bounce back from an attack? And we provide a solution that allows you to not only back up your environment, but quickly recover in an emergency, in the face of a ransomware attack or in the face of some type of operational issue. Our solution also focuses on removing things like vendor lock-in. If you feel like I've lived this in the past where, you're worried about, hey, I don't want to move from a very complex platform that I've spent thousands of hours configuring in. Well, we make that a lot easier. We take that from something that takes, hundreds, if not thousands of hours to do. And we settle that into, a fraction of the time by being able to migrate from one identity platform to the next. And then, with that, we've seen and worked with our customers where they can do a failover with that and failover between one identity platform to another identity platform, and essentially doing like a rapid migration in the event of a true disaster regarding their identity platform. So those are really the three spaces that we work in and solve around resiliency for our customers.
I think resiliency is on the tip of everyone's tongue now. I actually interviewed David Motti from Transfer Security on the episode that dropped just right prior to this one. And, that was one of the topics he wanted to talk about. It's like, this is on the mind of CISOs and CIOs around the world, right? We need resiliency in all of our IT systems. And at the core of all of that, what makes it all work is identity systems. Without the identity infrastructure, you can't get into IT systems. So I think you hit on, there's so much to unpack with what you talked about there. But before we start unpacking it, I've got to ask you one of the questions I'm sure is on everybody's minds, which is, how did you come up with the name MightyID? I love it, by the way.
Well, it really summarizes the fact that we're small but mighty. But really, when you think about it, the ID is, like we talked about earlier, at the center, and it is how business gets done. It is how work gets done, and it is something that is very, very important. And because of that, it's mighty, and you want to make it strong. You want to make it, impermeable. You want to make it secure. And so there's kind of a dual meaning to that. We think of ourselves as a small but mighty team, but that the ID is also a very mighty component of your environment. And so we combine that together to come up with MightyID.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that origin story. So tell me, Chris, if folks want to find out more about MightyID, what do they do? What do you recommend that they do?
Oh, yeah. Just come visit us over at MightyID.com. Especially for those listening to the show, they can go to MightyID.com/IDAC. We've got a special white paper that's there too that they can download called 6 questions to ask your identity provider, your IDP. And those are really centered on what if something bad happens, when things go wrong, you should be thinking ahead about what are those things that could go wrong and what to ask your identity provider. Because whether it's a security attack, whether it's an operational issue, whether it's a misconfiguration, how are you going to handle those situations around your identities? And so we'd like to make sure that people are informed, are thinking about those questions. So download the white paper. Bonus points if you want to go sign up for a demo, and we'll send you some cool swag.
That's cool. Yeah. We're always up in this industry. Everybody's up for a little bit of free swag. So, but I'm really excited about that white paper that you mentioned, like the 6 questions. I want to know what those questions are. I'm going to go out there and get that white paper, because I think if you have these 6 questions and they're really in depth and solid, if you're going out to RFP and looking at an IDP solution, like, include those questions. If you have an IDP, ask your existing IDP those questions, and make sure they can be answered. So that's what I would recommend. Go out there, look at what the questions are, see if they make sense for you, see if they resonate with you. So Chris, I wanted to know a little bit more about what makes MightyID unique.
So what makes us unique is really a little bit of the background of us is, we were spun out of a security company called Tavora. It's a security consulting company. So we really started with the security in mind and how we approach things. Next is really our architecture. Our architecture is built to scale. We scale up to millions and millions of IDs and objects and applications and attributes. And so that makes us unique also. On top of that, the options that we have for whether it's a dedicated or a kind of shared environment, we have those types of options for our product too, which make us unique. Then when you get to just how our product functions, we have another set of unique capabilities. Sure, you can do backup and recovery, and there are other products out there that do that, but we also do migration where you can move from one identity platform to another identity platform. That's something that saves our customers thousands of hours, and let alone the headaches and risks of migrations. I remember back in the day when, just doing email migrations or other types of migrations, and you would use the software for that. And that was always a little bit of stressful. So can you imagine identities and all your applications that are tied to that and all your access that's tied to that? So we make the migrations easier. And then we also do failover, which allows you to use 2 different IDPs in a disaster type scenario. So those are the things that make us unique.
Yeah, I'll admit, I thought I had a gotcha question for you, which was going to be around, this term resilience means a lot of things as you're laying out here, but I kind of thought of it in terms of the ability to recover from a quote unquote a disaster. And my gotcha question was going to be, we're in the, mostly talking about cloud IDPs here, Ping, Okta, Entra. Why do we need to back them up?
Well, first of all, everyone makes that initial assumption that it's in the cloud and it's always available. But, as it's that the service could be available, but it doesn't mean that everything you've built and configured is going to be 100% available and in there and how you expected it, right? So those providers give you essentially a bucket to put your stuff in. And so if something goes wrong, whether operationally, I've lived this firsthand, and maybe some people in your audience have too. Maybe you have, where, good intentions, you go in there to run a script to remove users or clean some things up. And that script actually, no matter how well you had it peer reviewed and everything like that, it ends up taking out, a whole bunch of users or a whole bunch of access or something. And what do you do? And how do you find that? And how do you recover from that? Right? That has nothing to do with whether it's in the cloud or not. Right? But that's still a resiliency factor of being able to quickly recover from that. Whether it's something like ransomware, where, being able to recover from, or step out of the way of a ransomware event, or, if heaven forbid there's the identity provider has a bad operational event happen to them, right? And you have to move out of the way of that. So there are those types of scenarios. And really what it comes down to is that shared accountability model that a lot of people just don't always think about when they know it's there, or they know it's in the contract, but they just believe that, well, it's up there. It's an always available service. They're running on a cloud environment. They're in AWS or something like that. And it's always going to be there. It's never going to have a problem. Right. And our customers have recognized the fact that there is a huge risk there. And that risk is they have to be able to, take accountability to recover and bounce back from those types of issues.
Yeah. I mean, it's this whole shared responsibility model, right? In the cloud. Right. I think you brought up a couple interesting scenarios, which is that people make mistakes. And by the way, I'll tell you that I've never run a script that screwed up production. Never. Okay. But people make mistakes.
Right. Right.
And then the other thing that you brought up was the ransomware attack, which I think is, you think ransomware, I was like, at least, I think my immature self used to think ransomware was like some hocus pocus thing that happens. And a lot of times it's someone gets a credential by phishing or social engineering, or they buy it from the dark web, and now they're onto your network. And, maybe they spread some kind of virus that gets onto an administrator's computer, locks them out, and then they connect to the IDP, credentialize, authenticate in an appropriate normal fashion, and then just start changing configurations in your, IDP tenant. And whose fault is that? Is that the IDP's fault? Because you authenticated in a way that appeared normal. You had the username, you had the password. Maybe you're able to complete the MFA because maybe you're using YubiKeys or something, and
right,
or whatever the reason is. You're able to authenticate, and now you start changing settings. Now, if you don't have a backup of those settings, you can't restore them. I mean, do you really want to be having to call Microsoft to say, restore all my settings to my Entra instance, and I've got 25,000 users who can't log in anymore? Like, you want to have some insurance policies to that, right? And that's what a lot of this is about.
Right. And in many ways, they're not going to be able to restore all that configuration to the level that you had set it. Or in your scenario, as you were saying, sure, if that attack vector was in through the IDP, it's their fault, right? If someone broke in through the IDP, hacked in through their
back channel,
back channel, then yeah, that's on their end of it. But if it's they called your help desk and social engineered their way in, because that never happened, and and what do you do then? And so that's really where you're taking control and you're getting control of that environment, and you're having, it's like what you and I talked about before. It's just the good old days of having those backups, right? But in this type of scenario, you can rapidly recover. You can recover in minutes. You can, our abilities allow you to recover down to the individual attribute, to individual user, the individual, if you just need to recover something like that, if you run a script that, deleted everyone's, something, an attribute on the user that is all their phone numbers, you can recover all their phone numbers, right? That's not necessarily a big critical thing, but it still can be a big headache. I mean, I've like I said earlier, I lived that nightmare where we had the entire C-level and senior executive leadership accounts removed by accident through inherent script. And I would have loved to have, this is many years ago before MightyID existed, and it was part of the reason, the passion project that is MightyID and why I'm here. But, I wish I would have had something like that I could have recovered from in minutes instead of spending hours trying to reassess what happened and how do we build those accounts back and so on and so forth.
Right. Yeah. If you're an administrator and of an IDP, this is like a little bit of an insurance policy. From the ransomware perspective, to me, that's the new disaster. That's the new earthquake,
right?
Or the new tornado. Like, you mentioned a scenario like, okay, the IDP, like the data center goes down, the IDP is in. that's kind of the idea. That is kind of the IDP's situation to restore from. And and when you look at like Amazon with their, their different availability zones, it's almost like if you configure things properly, you don't have to worry about that.
Right.
That doesn't save you from, poor practices in your identity management where somehow you cough up an ID or, you get compromised in a ransomware attack. You could very well be running into this situation where you'd be really happy if you have a backup. So that's the backup side of things. But you mentioned a few others. So the migration, vendor lock-in. So I would imagine that the organizations that get most excited about this are mid-sized to large organizations where they've got pretty big instances, even though like from an Entra ID perspective, I think like it's got to be 90% of companies run on Entra ID of all sizes now. But when you get into that very large organization, I mean, this seems like a tool where they could be doing mergers and acquisitions and, buying a larger company or smaller company and having to migrate them from whatever their IDP is to whatever your corporate standard is, a divestiture where you need to carve them out and get them running onto their own instance. Is that kind of what you're talking about here?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. There's obviously a few different scenarios that you can use this migration feature for, because we look at migration as two things. You can migrate between the same identity platform, just two different instances, or you migrate between two different vendor platforms, right? So how we've built the product and how our users or our customers have given us feedback and are using it is exactly that. They're using it for mergers and acquisitions, divestitures. They're using it to make test environments. They're using it to test their BCDR plans, right? I mean, you go from a tabletop exercise, which is great in theory, but to actually be able to restore a tenant and test it and really know that it works in real time is pretty powerful. And then you've got those big strategic projects where you're talking about a company that wants to move from one platform to another, or a company that says, hey, we want to move our SIAM onto a different platform for diversity of capabilities. So we don't have all of our identities on one platform from a risk perspective. So we might put our customer identities on one platform and use our enterprise internal identities on another platform, but we need to split those out, right? So let's migrate those off. So there's a lot of different use cases for how our migration capabilities get used by customers. And we learn new things every day from them. We get new feedback from them and how we develop. And we've got some pretty cool ideas in our future roadmap for that too.
Kind of feels to me like there's one kind of like the main feature, which is, I always go back to Veritas Backup Exec. That was like the backup to tape platform that I used for so many years. I remember like going out of style, backing up to tape and shipping tapes to offsite locations, and you picture some like mine under the earth that you're storing your tapes and like it's cooled and everything. But that's a really old analogy, right?
Yeah.
But it has the
showing
feature
your
of
age,
like
Jim.
showing my age really early here. But I'm kind of like picturing this as like the main features, like the ability to back up and to restore.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also seeing this as like a tool because you've got the ability with this thing to do the migrations. I also could see a scenario where you're using this MightyID to say, all right, we're going to migrate configurations from, pre-production environments to production, rather than kind of the stare and compare, which I know a lot of organizations. And so what I mean by that is that they don't have an automated way to take configurations from earlier environments to, closer to production. And so to me, that's like a huge benefit.
Well, it is. And you can, it gives you that ability to, build and destroy environments and use those identities in an environment for those purposes. And like I said, once you have that data, the configuration data, and you want to build another tenant or, another IDP like that, it's pretty easy, right? And you can just put it out there, and it's always interesting to see the different use cases and different scenarios in which our customers like to use it. And like I said before, they give us great ideas all the time.
You dropped a term on me when you and I were chatting earlier. You called it Change 360.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I just wrote that down, and I didn't tell you I was going to ask you about it, but what was Change 360?
Yes, Change 360. I'm glad you brought that up. So Change 360 is one of our key capabilities around being able to identify changes inside your configuration of your tenant and being able to trace that back to a patient zero. So now that we're backing up your tenant, and you're generally doing backups in a regular manner, some of our customers like to do it daily or weekly. We have the ability to do it continuously, and we recommend just let it run continuously and do it in an incremental continuous backup. Anytime there's a change that's done, it automatically backs it up. But anytime that change is done, backs it up, you can be alerted to that change, and you can go investigate it. And investigating it and see, was that something that should have happened? Was that something you can reconcile that if you want against the change record? Hey, was that an authorized change? You can go back and see how far back did that change go to? Does it tie back to a specific user, right? And so as you're keeping those incremental backups and keeping it over time, you can eventually, through our Change 360 capability, create a timeline map of changes on a user and by a user. So it turns into a really powerful investigative tool. Our customers think it's pretty cool. They like to play around with it and use it a lot. We've got some new features coming up around it, new enhancements coming up around it in the future. So look for some announcements coming out around what we're going to do differently and add on to Change 360. But it's really powerful, really insightful, and great tool.
Yeah, it sounds like a really powerful feature. And I just want to remind folks that if you're interested in learning more about the MightyID platform, MightyID.com/IDAC. There's a white paper out there. You can get a demo, sign up for a demo, and they also send you some cool swag. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Chris, is, you guys work with a lot of customers. How do they measure their success with your platform?
Yeah, so measuring success obviously is around a lot of those different user stories of the product, right? Around backup and recovery. So there's different measures of success around that compared to migration. The failover measure of success is kind of similar to that of the backup and recovery. But the first measure of success,
RTO.
Yeah, is around RTO. So the first one's around RTO and being able to recover quickly in the event of some type of failure or issue. The second measure of success is project-based measure of success. How quickly and how you can de-scope risk in your projects around things like migrating, around projects like divestitures or acquisitions and things like that. Because those all those things are going to have risks associated with them. They're going to have project timelines. They're going to have costs. So those measures of success reduce those costs, reduce those timelines, reduce the risks, and even the risks around operational issues that can happen because of that project. So you're working now with the MightyID and a tool that automates these things and significantly reduces the risks around human error and just the manual work involved with it. And the failover piece of our component is measured in a sense of very similar to RTO. When you get into some of our other features like our Change 360 and our new features that'll be coming out here in the next few months around our health check and dashboarding health check capabilities, there's going to be success measures, obviously the Change 360 success measure is around, security and investigations and even change management, like being able to understand what changes are happening. Our health check capabilities will obviously enable success measures around, the health of your tenant and the configuration of your tenant in the way of, do you have, best practices applied? Do you have things like, MFA enabled for all your applications? Or, do you have, too many users with administrative privileges and things like that? So those are other additional, capabilities that will help give, administrative and other, pieces of information for users to measure.
So obviously your MightyID solution is built around allowing customers or helping customers be more resilient. How is MightyID resilient? Like, are you guys in a globally diverse and a failover configuration? How are you managing that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. We touched on that earlier, I believe, a little bit, but we do operate in in AWS in both regions in the US, and we operate in Europe and Canada, and so we have diversity in our architecture there, and then besides having all the built-in diversity in the architecture and resiliency built in there, we also run our backups and backing up ourselves in a different cloud in Azure. So we're about making sure we're resilient around our architecture and how our application operates, so that we're not going to fall prey even to the issue of a huge cloud failure or something like that.
That sounds good. What is the future for MightyID? Where are you taking the product?
That's an interesting question. Our product is focused around resiliency, and I think we can go multiple places. We can continue to grow the product in the way of how do we cover more identity platforms, and that's a natural kind of growth trajectory for us. It can be a little tricky sometimes because the more you start to grow all those identity platforms, it becomes a lot of work to keep parity and to keep, everything running that way. So we have to be smart about it. And we really try to listen to, prospective customers and our customers' needs on where we should drive that piece of it. The other piece of it is really how do we help enable the security story and the change management story and the what we would call the health and metrics story of identities overall. And so that's where we're taking this, because we really look at the identity can be an asset, it can be a security mechanism, it can be so many different things. And so when you have all this information from backing it up and holding it, it becomes something that is pretty useful. So we're looking at ways that we can take that information and present it to our customers, their information, and present it to our customers in ways that is even more useful for them.
Sounds pretty exciting. Yeah, I expect you to just rattle off products, but I think you made a good point there. It's just like, that's really not easy to maintain, and that's probably not the right way to go about it, right? Is it better to be broad and shallow, or is it better to be, more narrow but deep? And I'm sure your customers who are on your platform, in those areas, they want you to go deeper and deeper.
They do, and that is, and we certainly want to be there with them. And sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. It all depends on what you're able to access inside that vendor's platform. Right. So what and how you can access inside of Okta, inside of Entra or Ping or IBM, or, just start going down the list. And when you're doing that, you can go deep and deep and deep and deep. And we will always try to meet our customers' needs in that space, but it is a dilemma, and there's a balance that we have to strike, because there's always going to be customers out there that are on some other platform, and they want that backup and recovery capability too. So, it's a constant, push and pull, tug of war, so to speak, within our strategy.
So let's be clear. What are the platforms that you currently support?
So today, we support Okta, Microsoft Entra, and Ping One.
Okay.
And we've got other ones in the roadmap in the future. We're even looking at the big boys like, AWS and Google, and should we be looking at doing things like that? Because we've heard from our customers, even our customers that have Microsoft or have Ping or have Okta, they're looking at these other platforms, maybe not just as a replacement, but they're looking at these as augmentation. Because I don't, although some companies and some of our customer strategy is to have a single identity provider, like I said earlier, some are thinking about splitting them up. Some are accepting that a hybrid identity platform is better for them, even though there's a little bit more overhead in the management and so forth. So that's where we can really provide value too, because we can help back up and recover both of their platforms or all of their platforms, and they can have one tool to do that.
Well, it's not just IDPs. I mean, you kind of extend into the IGA market.
Yep.
You can look at privileged access management. There's a bunch of other IT IAM spaces that are maturing. I mean, it's certainly when it comes to IDPs, it's like, if it goes down, even for 5 minutes and people can't log in, that's a major issue. Usually from a provisioning standpoint, it's not, but there are a lot of large organizations that have whole teams managing those IGA platforms. And I bet you there are a lot of times where people would like to go back and see what was the configuration before we rolled all these changes in, or what were all these changes. Like, let's run a differential. I could definitely see that.
Yeah.
So, Chris, before we wrap things up, I wanted to talk to you about the Gartner IAM Summit. When this episode drops, the summit is only a few days away. For those who haven't registered, by the way, we do have a discount code. It's IDAC 375, saves you $375 on your registration fees. Chris, are you guys going to have a MightyID booth on the expo floor?
We sure are. And we look forward to having everyone stop by and see us. We'll be there. I'll be there Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So stop by and say hi. We'd love to talk to you, tell you more about what we do, and hear from you too. Like these are great opportunities for us to not only interact with everyone in the community, but a lot of times too, we hear some of the pain points. We get great ideas, and we collaborate with everyone there to come up with new ideas and come up with new solutions. Some of the features in our products today have come directly from collaborations like that. So love to hear from you. Stop on by, and hopefully I'll see you there too, Jim.
I love that. That's like a very good perspective, and it's a unique opportunity for folks. Like, how often do you have an opportunity where you can go to somebody, whether or not you're using their product, give them your ideas, and potentially end up seeing them come to fruition? So I definitely encourage everyone to take the time to swing by the booth. Chris, wanted to take us out on a lighter note. It's kind of tradition here at the Identity at Center podcast. And you and I, we were sports dads. I was a baseball coach and dad for many years. Now you are on the lacrosse side with your son, and he's doing some big tournaments. And one of the things you mentioned to me was that lacrosse, and by the way, when you said this, you said lacrosse builds resilience. And I just pictured what you meant was the guys hitting each other with the sticks. And I'm not even sure if that's what you call them, sticks or what.
Yeah.
But I've seen some of those tournaments on TV, and it's not a gentle sport. And the guys aren't padded up as much as they are in football. So, no. I mean, you got to be pretty resilient to do that.
Yeah,
part
you got to be willing to take. Yeah, you got to be willing to take a few hits. I grew up playing hockey and soccer and baseball. I didn't play lacrosse, but I gained an interest in it when my son started gaining an interest in it at about 9 years old. He's 14 now, so he's been playing for about 5 years. And quickly into the sport, he realized he didn't like running a lot. He likes playing and playing around, but he just didn't like having to run a lot. And it's a run a lot sport. I mean, you are running all the time. And so he decided to switch to goalie, as a lot of goalies, if you talk to a lot of goalies in lacrosse, the reason they moved into goalies is because either one, they were the younger brother and their older brother put them in goal at home and would just shoot on them, or they didn't like running. And so, he falls into that other category, not running. And so he started playing goalie and quickly learned that it's a very, very difficult position. It's even more difficult than the other, the other positions on the field. And goalie in general, when you think about something like, soccer goalies or, hockey goalies and things like that, that it's different than any other position on the team. And it can be a very high stress position because all eyes are on you at that moment when someone's taking a shot. And in a sport like lacrosse, the lacrosse goalie, a good goalie is generally 55, 60%, save average. And that can be pretty tough when you're thinking that, just about every other shot on you is going to go into goal. No matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, it can be like that. Now, that's not always the case for all of them, but that's generally how it goes. So building up that mental resiliency is a big thing. And he and I have worked on that a lot. And I've learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about him, and learned a lot about just the idea of resiliency overall. And it's how it's become such a big concept in technology and security. I mean, I've seen, all the old BCDR and whatever concepts and terms and teams are now becoming resiliency teams. The IT operation teams are becoming IT resiliency teams. I've even seen security resiliency teams. So resiliency is becoming a very, kind of strong concept in the technology world and the security world. And so, and then in my personal world, I live this, almost every day with my son on how he becomes more resilient as a goalie and learning how to, bounce back and be stronger again. And whether someone's, cranking on him at, from 30 feet away and with a 70, 80 mile an hour shot. And, he's either got to be able to just stand there and take it, and not be afraid of it. And, or it could, that person could put it right on the right spot and shoot it by him. And he's got to be okay. Like, all right, gonna get it next time. So, the whole idea of resiliency is just something that has become a strong kind of center in my life. And I think it really just is a focus on how we just become better every day.
Yeah. I mean, I think youth sports is full of, the popular term nowadays is teachable moments. Full of teachable moments. I remember coaching, 8, 9-year-olds and them crying after they struck out. And I would not in the moment, after the game or at the practice the next day, just say, unless you're crying when your teammates strike out, I don't want you crying when you strike out. This is a team game, man. It's not about you.
Right.
And so I think if you want to try to drive a certain kind of thinking, that's, there's a lot of opportunities. And being a coach to young people is like such a privilege, such an opportunity to really mold them.
I agree. And especially the concept, I know it seems like we're overusing it, but the concept of resiliency is so important, even more so today, because when you think about the environment our kids are growing up in, I just think about it like, he's got a smartphone, he's got social media, he's got all this other pressure around him, things that I didn't even think about when I was growing up. Right. And how do you be resilient in the face of all those pressures and in the face of all that stress and expectations and just be able to, move forward every day and make yourself just a little bit better every day and push out all the noise, like you said. And life is a team sport, and it's not always just about you, and resiliency isn't just about how you cope with it yourself. It's how, you cope as a team and with the people around you and the people you have and the type of people you have around you, right? So that's also very, very important. And that's what, he loves about it too, is his team. It's his, he loves being around his team. He, even when, if they don't win, they do it as a team. So it's great to see.
Great points. Great discussion. Chris, I really appreciate you coming on this show today. Really enjoyed this discussion. Again, I think you mentioned you're good with people finding you on LinkedIn, searching you up and just connecting to you. I'm open to the same thing. So if you're a listener of this podcast, especially if you made it to this point in the show, please look me up on LinkedIn, send a connection. I know Jeff is of the same mindset. MightyID can be found on the web at mightyid.com/ADAC if you're interested in getting that white paper as well as signing up for a demo and enjoying some swag. Also look for MightyID. Look for their booth at the Expo Hall at Gartner IM Summit if you're there next week. And the Identity at the Center podcast is available on all of your podcast listening platforms, as well as on YouTube. Go to idacpodcast.tv. Our website is idacpodcast.com. If you get an opportunity to give us a like, a 5-star review, any of the good stuff, we certainly would appreciate it. It helps us get the word out and more people to find the show. For now, thanks for listening, and we'll see you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.